Hi there. This week I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about essays. So, what makes an essay a good essay? What makes an argument a good argument? Well, I think the first virtue of any piece of writing ordinarily is clarity. I suppose you could imagine pieces of writing that are intentionally unclear for a variety of different human purposes, but for the purpose of this class, if your essays are unclear, I can only conclude two things. One, you don't know how to be clearer, or two, you're intentionally trying to be obtuse. Neither of those things is likely to result in a particularly good outcome for your essay. So, again, clarity is certainly, as far as I'm concerned, the first virtue of your essays. Even if I think that you're mistaken, if you're clearly mistaken, I think that's better than being unsure, being left unsure whether the argument could potentially be good or not. So you have Calvin here, who has figured out that a lot of academic writing is obtuse, of course, and so he starts stringing meaningless words together. Now, in defense of academia, it's often the case that in order to be more precise and more clear, we make up words, jargon, to try and simplify. But of course, that jargon is only intelligible to people who understand jargon. And of course, once taken outside the context of academia, these kinds of words lose their relevance and lose their meaning and lose their clarity. So what this tells us is that when you're writing for an academic audience, then certain kinds of vocabulary are potentially useful, but when you're writing for a lay audience, then you want to have a very different kind of vocabulary. Okay, why clarity? Well, I want to suggest to you that effective communication has never been so important as it is today. Why do you think that might be? Well, for one, the world is more interconnected than ever, which means that economic activity in particular requires more and more collaboration with people who, at the end of the day, are very different from you, have very different background assumptions, whose first language may not be the same as your first language. All of this means that being able to communicate across these greater divides is more and more important, whereas before you might only have had to interact with people from your particular section of the United States or with the United States period. Now you have to deal with people from many different continents, with many different first languages, all of whom are trying to coordinate their behavior, that is to say, trying to reach agreements and do things together, but if they cannot communicate, then it becomes very, very difficult. So communication is going to be extremely important and more important as economic activity goes global. Also, attention spans seem to be shorter than ever, so it's all the more important to be able to make your point inside a short space of time. People just don't have the time to listen to long speeches anymore. And so as a result, you need to be able to get across your views succinctly, as well as clearly. So the cornerstone of effective communication, I think, is got to be clarity. So how do we make our communications clearer? How do you, when you're thinking about, when you really need to make somebody understand something, how do you go about it? Let me offer you some tips. One, get to the point quickly. Right, so don't lose your audience with a long lead-in. Don't lose your audience with irrelevant material. You want to keep your communication on point, which means you get to the point quickly and you make sure that you're constantly telling your audience why what you're saying is related to that point. Which brings us to our second way of making communication clear. Organize your ideas effectively. Separate different issues into different paragraphs, which basically means keep distinct issues distinct. If you're putting two things in the same paragraph, your reader might be confused as to why you're doing that, given that your reader perceives these issues to be distinct. Examine assumptions, especially terminology. Now, this is really important, particularly in political theory papers that you're going to be writing. People come with different assumptions. People have use very different vocabulary sometimes to talk about stuff. When someone uses the word capitalism or socialism or liberalism or conservatism, these words have many meanings in many different contexts. And so, as a result, you need to be as clear as you can be to bridge that gap between yourself and your audience. People aren't going to know what you're talking about if you don't give them a little bit of context. So examine your assumptions and define your terms if possible. Also, try to use examples and analogies to illustrate abstract principles. Examples are incredibly helpful. I think professors as a whole, this is a weak point for many professors because we as academics tend to be fairly comfortable with abstract reasoning, and that's something that we developed. When we started out, we weren't. So we have to make a special effort to try and give examples to make it clear what we're talking about. And I think that's true as well for students who are wrapped up in the particular ideas in their paper. Use examples and analogies whenever possible to try and illustrate your point. Distinguish your voice from source material, particularly when you're dealing with texts and you want to quote or cite texts. You want to make it clear when the text is talking and when it's you talking. This requires just quotation marks if you're directly quoting, or otherwise making it very clear that when it is that you are talking and when it is that the text is talking. The reader can get very confused sometimes. And finally, and this is just good general advice, proofread and edit for content and style. What this means is that never hand in your first draft. Even if you've been rereading your paper as you write it, you reread every paragraph to make sure that you're done with it. Reread your paper as a whole at least once. Just look it over, make sure it all hangs together. I guarantee you that you will reap benefits grade-wise from doing that. Okay, so that concludes the introductory part. Up next, I will talk a little bit about introductions and how to get started on your papers.